The courtroom in District Courtroom 4B was heavy with tension, the kind that settled over the room like a slow-building storm. As the fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, the audience shifted restlessly on stiff wooden benches. The bailiff stood near the judge's bench with folded arms, scanning the room with the rigid vigilance of someone who had already seen too many explosive mornings. At the respondents' table, Kody Brown sat with his jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched beneath the skin. His eyes were fixed in a narrow, burning stare across the room, while his attorney, Ms. Harrington, quietly flipped through a binder swollen with financial records, every page marked with colored tabs like a battlefield map. Across from them, Christine, Janelle, and Mary sat shoulder to shoulder, each woman locked in her own storm. Christine's foot tapped rhythmically and uncontrollably against the floor while her hands wrung the hem of her sleeve. Janelle gripped a tissue that had long been shredded from stress, and Mary remained unnervingly still, arms crossed, face emotionless except for the tightness around her jaw. The judge entered moments later, calling the courtroom to order as everyone rose and settled back into their seats. Ms. Harrington rose with the quiet confidence of someone who had rehearsed every syllable she was about to say. She stepped to the center of the courtroom and raised her voice just enough to command the room. She insisted that the plaintiffs were mischaracterizing the last decade of financial decisions, painting Kody as deceitful and manipulative when, according to her, every transfer, every account, every dollar moved had been done under legal and tax-advised guidance. Her tone was forceful, almost rehearsed, as she stated there was no criminal case to debate, no theft, no intentional misrepresentation, only heartbreak, tangled emotions, and the collapse of an unconventional family. Christine scoffed under her breath, muttering about late filings and half-informed decisions, while Mary responded with a cold whisper, noting how many documents had been signed without their full understanding. The judge shot them a stern glare. But Ms. Harrington continued unfazed, framing Kody as a man navigating a complex family structure where shared assets were the norm and emotions had clouded judgment, not deception. Kody erupted unexpectedly, unable to contain himself. He insisted that the women were distorting history, that he had been acting in everyone's best interest. His outburst sent a ripple of gasps through the gallery, and the judge immediately reprimanded him, ordering him to remain silent. Kody dropped back into his seat with a frustrated exhale, arms crossing tightly over his chest. Opposing counsel, Ms. Ramirez, rose in sharp contrast, calm, precise, and carrying the weight of a different truth. Ms. Ramirez countered that the defense was romanticizing misconduct, reducing very real actions to emotional miscommunications. She explained that the issue before the court was consent, or rather, the lack of it. She stepped toward the bench with confident, deliberate steps, explaining that the plaintiffs had been left in the dark on many financial transfers, that accounts were opened and closed without their knowledge, that funds were diverted toward one partner, while others lived in financial strain. Her voice remained steady as she emphasized that this wasn't a story about heartbreak, but one about accountability. Kody muttered again, accusing the women of benefiting from everything he had provided, and that was the moment Janelle could no longer stay silent. She shot up in her seat and reminded him sharply that while he funded a comfortable new home for one partner, she had been living in an RV. The judge's gavel cracked through the room like a gunshot, demanding silence. When the room finally settled again, Ms. Ramirez pushed forward. She stated that transparency had never existed, that the patterns of secret transfers, delayed or incomplete tax filings, and preferential treatment painted a clear picture of intent, or at least reckless disregard. She insisted this case was not a family tragedy but a financial one, shaped by choices that hurt people who had trusted Kody implicitly for decades. A cold hush fell over the room as she finished. Even Kody seemed briefly stunned into stillness. The judge leaned forward, acknowledging the severity of the claims and ordering the next financial expert to be brought in. Christine's shoulders sagged with a trembling exhale. Janelle stared ahead with burning eyes, her expression a mix of fury and relief. Mary wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, quickly hiding the gesture. Kody sat alone in the center of it all, flushed with anger, his breathing shallow and uneven as the consequences of years of choices and secrets closed in around him. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a low echo as the bailiff stepped aside to let the financial expert enter. A woman in her mid-50s, composed and stern, walked forward carrying a thick folder of documents pressed against her side. Her heels clicked sharply with each step, the sound punctuating the tension that already weighed heavily in the air. She moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades dissecting numbers, accounts, and patterns that most people wouldn't dare look at too closely. As she was sworn in, Kody stared at her with narrowed eyes, already anticipating what she might say. Christine and the others leaned forward subconsciously, their breath held in quiet expectation. Once seated, the expert opened her folder with steady hands. She introduced herself as Margaret Fields, a forensic accountant with 22 years of experience investigating asset distribution and irregular financial activity in complex family structures. Her tone was neutral, painfully neutral, the kind of neutrality that made her words even heavier because they carried no emotional motive. Ms. Ramirez approached her with calm confidence, asking her to detail what she found in her analysis of the Brown family's shared finances over the past decade. Margaret began by outlining the structure of the financial system Kody had created: multiple LLCs, interlinked accounts, separate household budgets, and several personal and joint accounts that had been opened and closed in rapid succession. She described the setup with the precision of a surgeon, but beneath that clarity was an undeniable implication. The system wasn't just complicated, it was convoluted enough to obscure visibility. And for most of the women sitting in the courtroom, visibility had been the one thing they never had. She explained that from the outside, the accounts appeared legitimate, but when she examined the flow of funds, unmistakable patterns emerged. Over the years, there had been repeated transfers drawing funds from joint or multi-signature accounts into accounts controlled solely by Kody. These transfers were often followed by expenditures that aligned exclusively with the needs and improvements of one household, Robin's. She did not cast judgment, she merely presented the numbers. But the numbers spoke with a brutal clarity. Christine swallowed hard, her throat tightening as she listened. She had lived through the confusion, the anxiety, the nights wondering why bills were piling up while money seemed to vanish into thin air. Hearing it laid out this plainly made her chest tighten. Janelle pressed a hand over her mouth, blinking rapidly to keep from showing the swell of emotion rising inside her. Even Mary, who had cultivated a defensive shell over years of emotional strain, looked down at her hands, her jaw quivering for just a moment before she steadied herself. When Ms. Ramirez asked the accountant whether the plaintiffs were aware of these transfers, Margaret answered simply, "No. There is no indication that any of them had full visibility. In fact, documentation suggests that at least 3 signatures were missing from transactions that should have required them." Her voice echoed across the silent courtroom like a weight dropping onto a glass floor. Kody shifted abruptly, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. His attorney placed a subtle hand on his arm to calm him, but the gesture did nothing to soothe the storm tightening around him. The judge's eyes flickered toward him with a silent warning. Margaret continued, revealing that tax returns had been filed with incomplete disclosures, some years missing income from certain LLCs, others including deductions linked to properties that only benefited one household. A few documents even listed Mary or Christine's information as part of filings they never recalled approving. It wasn't outright criminal, she clarified, at least not conclusively without intent, but it was careless, secretive, and undeniably imbalanced. The room felt suffocating as the reality sank deeper. When Ms. Harrington rose to challenge the findings, she tried to frame the inconsistencies as mistakes made during years of chaotic paperwork, the kind of errors common in large families with unconventional arrangements. But Margaret fielded every question with unshakable steadiness, each answer reinforcing the same conclusion. The financial structure had never been transparent, and the benefits had not been equal. Across the room, Kody's breathing grew louder, more erratic. His shoulders were tense, and a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. It was clear he wanted to speak, to interrupt, to defend himself, to attack anyone who dared portray him as reckless or self-serving, but the judge's stern eye kept him in check. The courtroom had seen enough of his outbursts for one morning. When the expert finally stepped down, the silence was thick and electric. The judge called for a brief recess. People stood, stretching stiff limbs, murmuring to one another, the weight of the testimony still heavy on their minds. Christine remained in her seat, staring down at her hands as if finally understanding the full magnitude of the things she had endured. Janelle sat with her shoulders trembling, though she tried to hide it. Mary placed a tentative hand on the bench beside her, grounding herself quietly. Kody stayed seated as the courtroom emptied for the break. His face was flushed with humiliation, frustration, and a swelling panic he tried desperately to mask. He stared straight ahead, unblinking, unwilling to meet the eyes of the women who now had documented proof of what they always suspected but were never allowed to say. And for the first time since the trial began, he didn't look furious. He looked afraid. Savannah handed the phone to the bailiff with hands that trembled only slightly, a sign of how long she had been waiting to surrender this truth. The bailiff delivered it to the judge, who scrolled slowly, methodically, his eyes narrowing with each line. The room was so silent that even the soft friction of the judge's finger against the screen sounded loud. "These," Savannah said, steadying herself, "are messages where my father told me he couldn't visit because Robin needed him to rest, or because her children were anxious, or because her schedule took precedence. They're messages where I asked if he would come to my graduation ceremony, and he said he was busy." But on that same day, he posted photos of himself at Robin's house having a barbecue. Robin let out an audible whimper, her face collapsing, but Savannah did not look at her again. She looked at Kody. Only Kody. "And these," she added, her voice barely above a whisper, "are the messages where I asked if he would call me on my birthday. He read them. He never responded." The judge took several long breaths. He handed the phone back to the bailiff, who returned it to Savannah with a soft, solemn reverence. Savannah stepped back from the witness stand but didn't sit. Her feet held their ground as if she were rooted in something ancient, generational hurt, generational silence, finally cracking open. Kody stared at her with eyes full of a panic no one had ever seen from him. He mouthed something, but Savannah shook her head, wiping a tear with the back of her sleeve. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," she whispered across the courtroom. "I'm doing this because you hurt us. All of us. And someone has to say it before it happens again." Robin's sobs intensified. She buried her face in her hands, her body hunched over like a dismantled marionette. Christine bowed her head, but it wasn't pity, just grief that her children had carried wounds she couldn't always see. Janelle sat absolutely still, her jaw clenched as if she were fighting not to break down herself. Kody finally stood, hands trembling. "Savannah," he choked out. I didn't realize." She cut him off with a single, sharp inhale. "You did know," she said. "You just didn't want to look." The judge lifted a hand. "Mr. Brown, you will remain silent unless instructed to speak." Kody froze, slowly sinking back into his seat. His gaze drifted downward, his knees shaking. The judge straightened. "This testimony is relevant," he said, his tone heavy with something close to disappointment. "It speaks to pattern, impact, and intent." The room shifted, energy tightening again, coiling into a new kind of anticipation. Before Savannah could step down, Shiloh's attorney rose. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we have additional questions if she's willing." Savannah nodded once, resolute. "I'm willing." The attorney approached, holding a stack of printed images. "Savannah, can you identify these?" Savannah glanced at them, screenshots, emails, several photographs. She nodded. "Yes. These are from the shared family folder, the one we used for schedules before Robin took control of it." The attorney held up one page. "Can you explain this highlighted entry?" Savannah swallowed. "That is the week my dad was supposed to visit us. All of us. But Robin deleted the event from the shared calendar. When we asked her if he was coming, she told us Dad needed emotional recovery time and that we shouldn't guilt him." The attorney nodded, then pulled up another image. And this? Savannah's throat tightened. That is the message Robin sent to my mom. She said. Savannah paused, her voice cracking. She said that if we were upset, it was because my mom was poisoning us against Dad. But we weren't upset because of her. We were upset because he wasn't there. Robin shot to her feet. I didn't mean Savannah, you have to understand. The judge slammed the gavel. Mrs. Brown.
Sit down.
Robin collapsed backward, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. She sat in stunned silence, mouth quivering, tears dripping onto the table. Savannah looked at her for the first time, but not with hatred, with exhaustion. I don't hate you, Savannah said softly. But you hurt us. For years. And maybe you didn't realize, or maybe you didn't care. But I need you to hear it now. Robin covered her mouth with both hands, shaking uncontrollably. The attorney stepped back. Your Honor, this completes our questions. The judge nodded. Savannah, you may step down. She stepped off the stand with a weightlessness that came only from truth unburdened, passing her mother, who gently brushed her arm, whispering, I'm so proud of you. But Savannah didn't stop walking until she reached the far bench, where she sat and curled her hands together, breathing deeply, eyes forward. Judge Harris turned his attention back to the front of the courtroom. Given the testimony presented, he announced, this court will proceed with deliberations on whether a formal financial, familial, and moral conduct investigation will be launched into Mrs. Robin Brown. Robin inhaled sharply, her entire body jolting. Kody looked at her, then at the judge, then at the floor, like a man realizing every bridge he ever crossed was now burning behind him. But the judge wasn't finished. He lifted another set of papers. Additionally, he said, clearing his throat, we have received a sealed affidavit from one more individual who wishes to testify today. Kody's head shot up. Robin's eyes widened. The gallery collectively leaned forward. The judge looked toward the doors. Please bring in the witness. The doors opened, and the person who stepped inside made the courtroom erupt into gasps so loud the walls trembled. Judge Harris's voice had softened at the end of his rare post-courtroom interview, but what he said next carried a weight that stunned even the seasoned reporter sitting across from him. Some people think justice is about punishment, he murmured, folding his hands. But in cases like this, justice is about truth finally getting louder than fear. He didn't elaborate, didn't name names, didn't even hint at which direction the winds of prosecution were blowing, yet his words ignited every corner of the internet. Analysts dissected the line. Attorneys speculated. Fans created theories that trended for hours. Because when a judge who rarely speaks publicly says the truth is louder than fear, everyone knows someone is about to be exposed. Back in Flagstaff, the ripple of that comment hit every member of the fractured family like a shockwave. Kody's phone buzzed nonstop, calls from reporters, lawyers, producers, even estranged siblings, but he ignored them all, pacing the small kitchen of his rented condo. For the first time in years, the walls felt too close. The silence too loud. He stared at his own reflection in the dark microwave door, seeing a man who once commanded a household of over 20 people and now couldn't control a single narrative about his own life. He whispered to himself, this got away from me. But even he didn't believe the excuse anymore. The truth wasn't just louder now. It was roaring. Across town, Robin sat on the thin mattress of a temporary rental, her hair unbrushed, knees drawn to her chest, replaying every leaked email, every blog post, every accusation. She had once believed she could control the story. She had convinced herself that managing the family's image wasn't manipulation, it was protection. But now the world had flipped on her. The public wasn't calling it devotion. They were calling it design, strategy, betrayal. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, to scream the parts no one knew. But every drafted message, every attempted video, every rehearsed statement felt like quicksand pulling her deeper. The more she spoke, the more she risked sinking. So she stayed silent, clutching her phone like a lifeline she no longer knew how to hold. Meanwhile, Mary watched the chaos from her cabin window. For the first time in years, she did not feel small or forgotten. She felt necessary. Her journal entries had cracked open the final layer the public needed to see, and she knew it. But she also knew the storm wasn't finished. She could feel it, like static in the air before lightning strikes. She turned another page of her journal and began writing again, her pen moving with a certainty she had never felt before. "Truth demands witnesses," she wrote. "And I am done being silent." She didn't know if she would post this next entry. But she knew one thing. She would no longer protect a man who never protected her in return. Christine, reading Mary's blog from her kitchen table, exhaled shakily. It was the first time she had seen Mary's voice unfiltered, unbroken, and unafraid. She texted her, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Mary didn't respond immediately, but the message didn't go unread. For the first time in years, the women who had been divided by denial, favoritism, and spiritual hierarchy were standing on the same ground, truth. It was shaky, painful, and burning beneath them, but it was real, and that alone made it powerful. Shiloh, on the other hand, felt the world closing in. The cease and desist, the subpoenas, the online fury, the pregnancy that had once felt like a future now felt like a fuse. She placed a hand on her stomach, whispering, "We'll be okay." But even she didn't know if that was a promise or a plea, because she had stepped into the light believing it would reveal love, and instead it revealed every fracture beneath it. Still, she held onto the ultrasound photo, the only truth she felt certain was hers. As for Janelle, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. She had spent too many years being patient, forgiving, bending. No more. She organized documents, consulted attorneys, spoke with accountants, and prepared for what was coming. "Justice isn't revenge," she told her children over dinner. "Justice is clarity." And they believed her, because for the first time in their lives, they saw their mother not as a quiet supporter in a chaotic system, but as a force emerging from it. By Friday afternoon, headlines exploded with a new update. Investigators had formally requested the family's full financial records going back 10 years. Sources reported that multiple individuals, names redacted, had already been contacted for questioning. Bloggers speculated. Reddit went wild. TikTok was a battlefield. And through it all, one phrase from Mary's second blog entry was repeated everywhere. "You can't rebuild with rotting wood." The world agreed.
Something was about to break.
And when it did, it wouldn't be small. It would be seismic. The letter was stamped confidential, addressed directly to Robin, advising her that her current course of action carried extreme risk of future litigation, particularly if any of the other wives suspected financial funneling or spiritual coercion. But the next line was the one that sent a tremor across the courtroom. "Be cautious. The structure you are creating around Kody appears less like marital practice and more like a spiritual monopoly." It advised her to maintain plausible deniability, to keep written directives minimal, and most damning of all, to ensure the other women never become aware of the consolidation plan. Robin had signed the letter, initialed each page, and tucked it neatly into her binder. Proof she wasn't naive, wasn't manipulated, wasn't swept into Kody's orbit. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had architected it. The courtroom didn't erupt.
It didn't gasp.
It didn't shout. It froze. A collective paralysis. Every viewer, every lawyer, every wife, processing the truth on the page. The silence was louder than accusation. When the judge finally spoke, her voice cut through the haze like a blade. "This is no longer a case of financial negligence. This is calculated intention." Kody shifted uncomfortably at the defense table, but Robin, wherever she was in Europe, could not shift at all. Her silence was louder than any plea. The prosecution requested an immediate expansion of charges to include coordinated deception, intent to defraud multiple parties, and malicious spiritual manipulation for financial gain. Kody's attorney objected, voice cracking, insisting Kody had been emotionally influenced. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Influence does not absolve participation," she snapped. "Mr. Brown, you benefited from this structure. You enforced it." But the courtroom was not prepared for what came next. From the back row, moving slowly and trembling, a man stood. Gray hair, wiry frame, hands shaking violently. The judge paused, recognizing him from filings. It was Kody Brown, Kody's estranged older brother, absent for over a decade. He walked forward with a single flash drive in his hand. "Your Honor," he whispered, "I have audio." The courtroom rippled. The judge asked him to approach. He handed over the drive, explaining it contained voicemail backups from an old family phone plan he and Kody once shared. He had held onto them out of equal parts habit and heartbreak. He had never listened to them until the news of the trial broke. But once he did, he realized what he had uncovered. "These messages," he said quietly, "they show what he really believed about the wives and what Robin convinced him he deserved." The judge exhaled, weary but resolute. She ordered the file authenticated. The IT forensics team confirmed. The timestamps matched phone logs from 2010 to 2017. The chain of custody was unbroken. The judge nodded. "Play the first recording." It was Kody's voice, clear, arrogant, unfiltered. "I can't get them to obey, Robin. They're too independent. Christine wants a say, Janelle wants freedom, Mary wants fairness. They don't get it. You get it. You know the plan. When it's all under you, everything else falls in line." A collective gasp. Then the next message, Robin's voice this time, soft, sweet, venomous. "Then stop letting them speak. They don't need decisions. They need direction. You lead. I'll manage. We'll prune the noise." Prune the noise. The phrase echoed in the courtroom like a haunting. Message after message played. Kody ridiculing the wives. Robin strategizing their isolation. Plans to adjust filming so certain wives appeared unstable. Plans to shift money under the guise of unity. At one point, Kody bragged, "In a few years, it'll just be us. The rest will drift away. Or break." Christine pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Mary stared at the floor. Janelle silently cried. When the last recording ended, the judge leaned back, eyes heavy with the weight of it all. "This," she whispered, "is systemic. This is exploitation masked as religion." But before she could adjourn, another twist entered the room like a ghost. A court officer rushed in, whispering frantically into the judge's ear. The judge's eyes widened. She cleared her throat, addressing the courtroom. "We have received confirmation," she announced slowly, "that Robin Brown has been detained by Portuguese authorities at the request of the United States government." The courtroom erupted, shouts, cries, murmurs, flashes of cameras. Kody slumped back in his chair, the last thread of control slipping from his fingers. But the judge raised her gavel. "Order. This trial is not over. In fact, it has just begun." Because one more witness had stepped forward. One nobody expected. One whose testimony would unravel not only the Browns' empire, but the very belief system Kody wielded like a weapon. A figure walked through the side door.
Old. Calm.
Dignified. A face seen only once in blurry family photos. The founding elder of the faith. And his first words were a cannon blast. "Kody twisted our scripture. And I'm here to show you how."